Your hosts are The Great Order and No White Guilt, and this is the one and only After Party. The crown winner of last week is a tie between Zero Talent and Wayne Scully, both financially gifting $25. Thank you both. Congratulations to you as well. Second place went to the one and only Heidi, financially gifting $5. Thank you so very much, Heidi. Congratulations to you as well. Financially gift here on Entropy, which will be up and running in a moment, where you can also watch the stream and ask and vote on questions, of course. Or you may financially gift over on Cash App. The URL for both is in the description below. Jared and I evenly share, as you all know, the financial gifts with our guests here on the After Party. Now, very quickly, I will say this. I am going to be heading back down to Florida to see Mama Fraulein Dresden, and I want to take with me a host of cards, condolence cards, Christmas cards, whatever you would like to send. Send them to my P.O. box. You can find that over on nowhiteguilt.org, nowhiteguilt.org. Get them out to my P.O. box as soon as possible so I can bring them with me on my trip down to Florida. Now, today, we have the one and only Jonas Nielsen with us. Jonas, please introduce yourself to our esteemed community. Tell them where they can find you, and then Mr. George will take us into what will undoubtedly be a scintillating conversation.
I must say that was a pretty hectic intro. It's the first time I see it. I really enjoyed it. My name is Jonas Nielsen, and I'm the founder of the Polyester media company, and basically a person that really enjoys try to describe the reality, both in words, pictures, and in all forms as they come. And documentary filmmaking were just a natural extension of that drive.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here again, Jonas. Welcome to the After Party, and we've been looking forward to this. Before we get into a little of your background, then we're going to talk about the documentaries themselves. What does Polyester, what is the significance of that word?
It's actually like this. I come from an MMA background, and I started my own MMA club roughly 12 years ago. And the reason why I did that is because in many Western countries, people that have an in-group preference for us native Europeans are quite easily ostracized from the civil life, and it's no different from within the athletic community. So I started a MMA club, and I wasn't sure what to name it, and it's just started to say that we just called it the mat in Swedish, like the wrestling mat, and the extension of that is that we take lots of inspiration, both politically and philosophically, from ancient Greece. Mm-hmm. And they also just call their arena the arena, and the name for the wrestling mat in ancient Greece is Polyester. So we just took the name for that, and that morphed into the MMA club is still there, and it's called Polyester Fight Club. And when I started a media company roughly 5 years ago, I was also thinking about what should I name this media company, and it's almost like you struggle physically on the mat. It's a way of communication, if you so want, and we also communicate with the word. So it's very important to understand why we do things, and we give those words life and meaning with our actions. And Aristoteles had his philosophy school in the Polyester. So it was wrestling on the shredder, but it was also the understandings of the essence of things in the Polyester. So I thought that those two actually linked very well to have the name of the fight club, Polyester Fight Club, and for the media branch where we try to communicate the perspective of reality of how we see it, to also name it Polyester.
That's terrific. I think a lot of people will appreciate that. What were some of your beginnings? What can you speak about that woke you up? And then what were your goals once you started to make videos and step out more publicly?
It's quite a long journey. I woke up in the 90s and started to organize as a 14-year-old boy in a nationalistic youth movement. And later on, that organization were not subdued, but it was like taken up into another bigger movement. So one day I was a member of this nationalist youth movement, and the other day I was a member of the Swedish resistance movement. And I stayed there for quite some time. I think the important thing with these people, I'm not in the Swedish resistance movement anymore, and I left with a good footing with them. But the good thing with all the people that woke up early were that they recognized that we have a problem in our society that we need to deal with. And the Swedish friendly movement were in a very premature state in the 90s, and so was this movement, in my opinion. And we had very premature ways of dealing with things. And it took me quite some time after I left that to really fall back and reconsider some tactics and strategies of how can we implement our will into this hostile environment. So after lots of thought, I decided to go into academia. So I studied political science at the National Defense University in Sweden and took my bachelor's degree and started my master's degree, but I never finished my master's because I started a media company. I actually had the ambition to do both at the same time, but I wasn't capable to do that. And I knew that with my degree, the reason why I studied was to understand the system, that not just to understand the system that we are within, but also understand those people that are in its core, that are upholding the system. And it was one thing that really struck with me when we studied military history as part of the reason why we studied political science at the National Defense University is for the Swedish armed forces to try to bridge over to the civilian life, and politics is a good way of that, because it's said that war is the continuation of politics with other means, and politics is civilians, and the armed forces is the end of brute force of politics. But it was a quote from Captain Liddell Hart, a British strategist and that fought in the Second World War. And he stated that the wars of the future will not be fight with bullets, but it will be fight with pictures. So it's the battles of the future is more the sway of opinions rather than moving mass armies like in the First World War or the Second World War. And that resonated with me, and that's when I started to actually thinking about starting a media company.
It's a perfect segue into talking about your documentaries. So I think the Boar Project was one of the first times I became aware of you on a bigger level. It's an ambitious project. You were able to go down to South Africa. So as I said at the beginning, we're going to speak about Jonas's documentaries, everybody, but let us know questions as they occur to you, because we might just weave in bigger themes, speak about specific things in his documentaries, but then obviously we know it all relates. But we'll begin with that, the Boar Project. And in particular, it was interesting to me when I watched it, how the people there, our peoples there, have to self-organize because they don't have anyone advocating for them in any kind of official means, in the media, certainly the government. So I'm just curious what you observed when you were there, and the degree to which people are having to take things into their own hands there and have their own self-defense groups, have their own communities where they're growing food and trading things with each other, orphanages, all kinds of things that you highlighted.
Yeah, it's a hard thing when you try to describe something, because regardless of what it is, you have some kind of pre-understanding of the subject, and it's important when you're highlighting something as a journalist that you go in with kind of a blank slate. So it's almost like writing an academic paper. You can't let your predetermined final thoughts be the ones that is the methodological drive force that takes you forward. So you can't. Everyone has some kind of like prejudice of what is the conclusion, but that conclusion can't be the drive force of what you're doing. You need to go there, you need to see by yourself, and that is what's being put together to this conclusion. And that's why I did this, because when you talk around in Sweden, especially with our governing party, the Swedish Social Democrats, that is a very close affiliate with ANC, the ruling party in South Africa, and we have very good ties, both politically and civilian. We have good business ties and so forth, and lots of Swedish tourists going to South Africa and really enjoy the time and have a safe trip, and can't see any problems whatsoever, because they're just touching the facade. They don't go in deeper and really see the country for what it is, as a native Boer of a European descendant that actually is forced to live in this area. Because if you come there as a tourist, everything seems to be fine, and everything is very, very joyful and kind of functioning. So I felt it was an important project just because I had some pre-knowledge of the country. I went down first time in 2008 and worked as a volunteer with Eugene Terre-Blanche with farm security. So I had a good understanding with the threat against the farmers. And after that, I also imported some South African goods with my own Swedish company and worked with that. And I also got in contact with more economical problems with the country, with their black economic empowerment, which the company where I bought the goods from, where he was a European descendant, so, and he was the majority shareholder. He owned it 100%. But he came into the state that he was telling me, like, Jonas, I need to take in a black partner, because otherwise I'm not allowed to. He could legally keep his business, but he wasn't allowed to take part of when Sweden, like South Africa, is a very socialist state. So lots of money and business runs through the state. So even my old business, like I had, where I imported these goods, like 1/3 of those business went through the state in one way or another. Like the customer were the municipality or the regional office and stuff like that. So it's tax money, and they can put some criteria to those money, and it's a lot of money, especially if you go up in the level in business. So he was forced to take in this black employee as a co-owner, which is just ridiculous. And when I talk to people in Sweden about the situation down there with the threat on the farms and how they are racially discriminated on the workforce with this black economic empowerment, it was like hard for them to really understand it. They didn't think that I was lying, but they couldn't grasp it, because that's not the picture that's being portrayed by the mainstream media, and that's also not what they see themselves when they go down there for a week or two as a tourist. So that's why I thought this documentary was very, very important to do.
What kind of reactions did you get from fellow Swedes when they saw the Boar Project documentary? Did you ever have a case where someone felt very differently, and then watching your documentary opened up their eyes and they admitted that maybe things are other than what they thought?
Very, very much so. Every open-minded person that doesn't have that doesn't do like even-minded interpretation of everything I do, as we as nationalists do. So they have already determined their mind that it doesn't matter what we say because we have this hidden evil agenda of wanting to take society back to the 30s, and everything we do is leading to that direction. Those people are down in their trenches, and it doesn't matter if the truth comes to them around the corner. They will not change. But I was amazed of how many people that took this documentary to themselves and actually said that I had no idea. Like what can I do to help for the situation and so forth. So that was really amazing. I really felt that the documentary did some kind of a difference. The situation down in South Africa is still very, very, very dangerous. It's not better than when I did it, but I think on an awareness level, it's fewer people that can be ignorant to the problems.
Did you have any problems screening it? Did you do public screenings? And if so, did you have resistance? Did you have venues that didn't want to host you because it was a hate movie or something like that?
Yeah, it was very, and it goes back to Sweden being such a socialistic country as well, or it doesn't really matter. It can be privately owned venues as well, because so first I rented a big cinema that is run by the municipality, which my tax money goes to in the municipality which I'm born and raised. And they canceled us the night before, so I had like 12 hours to find a new venue before the premiere, and they canceled it due to not the content of the movie. They used another pretext, and they said that the people that have written on the internet about this premiere are hateful. So we can assume that this is a hateful event. So we will cancel you. And when you stand up against it's you become a second-class citizen in your own country. I'm born and raised here. I paid my taxes. I do everything by the book, but I'm treated very, very different than if it were a movie that were more in line with the establishment narrative. And it's disgraceful. And what I mean with it doesn't really matter if this were a venue of municipality or private, because a couple of years later, after the premiere of this, I hosted a conference in Sweden under the same label of Boar Project, and we had the president of Orania there, Karl Bosov, and some other prominent people and opinion builders from South Africa. And it was the same case there the day before we got canceled from our first venue, so we needed to deal with a new venue. And then I had flown up 5 people from South Africa for this conference, and that was a private venue. But the reason why they chose to book us off is because the anti-fascist movement, AFA, had called and threatened them, like quite literally. He called me, was terrified in the middle of the night, and said, I don't dare to host this conference because I'm afraid of my staff. And this is where the illegitimate street thugs from the left goes hand in hand with the established left, because they don't delve into this kind of crime or deal with it. So it's a sanctioned terrorist to make the opposition be quiet or make them afraid to be speaking up.
Yeah, it's incredible. You're screening a film and you're told you're hateful. It's shut down but at the same time, it's shut down by people who are threatening violence.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, they wonder why we use words like clown world sometimes. What was it like being in those, when you were in South Africa filming, those areas where there were these communities, like you mentioned, the Philadelphia Arc is one of them, where the Boers have to kind of band together and have their own parallel societies. You just mentioned Orania as well.
Yeah.
A lot of people in our audience, I think, are familiar with that.
It's both a tragedy, of course, but it's also very, very beautiful. And then I'm speaking as a Swede, as a part of a people that has lost lots of its cultural identity. Many problems that we have in Sweden is because that we don't recognize our group at all. We say that there's no difference between people, and the border is just arbitrary, regardless if it's a country's border or if it's our so-called artificial borders between humans, because we are all individuals. And so it's very refreshing for me to go down to South Africa and actually deal with the people who have a very strong bond to its own identity and to its own culture. And I find that very, very refreshing and very, very beautiful. And especially with these Dutch descendants, that they are very close to, or at least were very close to what we Swedes once were when it comes to these things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what about another topic you discussed in the film, hate crimes, and how they're justified because there's a narrative about stolen land, and there's a lot to that. There's self-organized defense groups, but there's also the idea, again, we've spoken about this before. We had people on from South Africa a while ago where we spoke about this, where what we don't hear is that tip of South Africa was actually unoccupied land, and the people from Europe who came there are the ones who developed it. But there's a narrative right now that the land is stolen, and therefore these hate crimes are justified. I've just begun hearing, maybe this has been around for a while, here in the States and other English-speaking countries as well, like Australia would make sense, like non-European countries. People will begin these presentations. I don't know if, Jason, you've heard this or anyone's heard this. Even corporate presentations, like in a business setting, where let's say they're in Minnesota in the United States. They'll say something like, first, before we begin this meeting, we want to acknowledge that we're on the land of the so-and-so tribe. And it was like, you're starting to see that here in the United States as well. And it's a subtle implication that this land was stolen. And obviously, you could do a logic tree and see what's coming down, what's going to be justified if you keep following that logic.
Yeah, it's actually Sweden is one of the oldest administrative countries in the world. Our country is just over 1,000 years old, and even you can see that kind of narrative in Sweden, where us Swedes is not even considered to be the native habitat of Sweden. But we have these eastern steppe people, nomads, up in the very, very north of Sweden, which obviously weren't in Sweden as the north part of Sweden became Sweden much later than the central bulk of Sweden became Sweden.
We're talking about the Sami people up north?
Yeah, exactly, the Sami people. And my genetic heritage as a Swede, we came to Sweden from the south when the ice went up north. And so we habited this land before anyone else. We were the first settlers here, and we were first civilization builders here. But even here, you can hear that the native people of this land is the Samis that arrived much later and had nothing to do to establish Sweden as a state. So it's just the interpretation of history to serve their means to shape the future in the realms of politics. And the same is it in South Africa. There were nomads when the Dutch arrived. The Bushmen, and the Bushmen have a very good relation as a minority with the white minority in South Africa today. The Bushman is not the black majority of today, which is dominated by the Zulu and the Xhosa tribes, which arrived to present-day Cape region 150, 200 years later. So they're interpreting their history just so they can justify their theft of the white people through this black economic empowerment.
Yeah, I just want to quickly jump in. Great conversation so far. This whole idea that a land belongs, or therefore a country, therefore a civilization belongs to another people because some other people had trod that soil at some point in the past or what have you, or set up a wigwam or whatever it might have been, is psychological warfare. What they're stealing is not what they're stealing from us, anti-whites, is not the land on which we built Western civilization. It's Western civilization. Only we build Western civilization. So whether we call it Sweden, whether we call it South Africa, whether we call it the United States, whatever it might be, we build Western civilization. And the claim that they attempt to use, though, to thieve Western civilization incorporates, it's a presumption, it's a premise that is unspoken to the theft. So they come in and they say, well, these people were here at some point in the past, ergo, they have a right to all of your creations. Wrong, anti-whites. So it's just, this is an important thing that we need to keep in mind because we don't want to fall into the trap when we have these conversations, which is what this is all about, bringing people over to our narrative, using the 5 key concepts, bringing them in, if they can, into the practice of going free. When we have these conversations, we don't want to fall into this error, this trap that the anti-whites have set for us, where the anti-whites are saying, well, they were here first, and then the defense to that typically is something within the anti-white narrative, something along the line of, well, let me give you some revisionist history. Let me give you some history at odds with what all of the universities, anti-white universities, the media, etc., will say. That's a losing argument. So we need to nip it in the bud, if you will, and point out that this is psychological warfare. The theft is of our creation, Western civilization, not the land on which we built Western civilization. And again, we've talked about this before, where we pointed out that Western civilization, the presumption, of course, here is that it is, the civilization is there, and then we stole that civilization from some other group of people or groups of people, and that's why we occupy the seats of authority in that civilization. That's why never allow an anti-white to put you in that position. What they're after is what we create. They're not, and they're using any excuse that they can get there. So you can see the one really positive thing here that Jonas is saying that I think we can really be excited about is that, like biology, and we were discussing this a week or 2 weeks ago, like biology, thought, whether it's a mean pathogen or a mean curative, whatever it might be, is susceptible. And when you have something that is uniform around planet Earth, whether it's biological or merely in the realm of the mind, ideas, if it is uniform, it is there susceptible to a uniform cure. And that is what we have in the process and the practice of going free. Anti-whiteism is uniform the world over. Ideas that you think wouldn't work in places like Sweden, they are applied and work there. This is the anti-white ideology, anti-whiteism. And so where it is undermined in one place, it is undermined in all places. That's what's really exciting about the practice of going free. And that's why we have to continue to push it everywhere we can, because just like biology, if you had nothing but clones of a particular animal around the world and no genetic variation of that particular animal, then a single disease would wipe out the entire population of that animal. Same thing is happening right now for anti-whiteism. We are able to defeat it on every continent it has shown its head. But I'm simultaneously, Jonas, disgusted and delighted that anti-whiteism is identical in Sweden as it is everywhere else. of course, with variations of names and places and things of this nature. But to say that the land or that the country is not yours, because like Mr. George is pointing out here, you follow the logic tree and where you end up, where they start these meetings and they say, well, we are currently sitting on the land that was stolen. No, well, the land that was stolen, we have to immediately get into that conversation and get everyone in that conversation into the anti-white narrative. So I'm really exciting. And you're absolutely right. You mentioned at the beginning of the show today that the battle is being fought in the mind. The anti-whites control the field of violence. We need to control, and these victories that you have then outside of the field of violence are far more substantial than on the field of violence. But I just wanted to toss that in, maybe some food for thought. Jonas, I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that, and we can continue rolling.
Yeah, when you talked, I remember, I think I talked to a professor in law in Pretoria University, and they told me an interesting thing. I think it was one of the bachelor students that wrote his exam paper in this regard. But to just build it up, AfriForum, Ernst Roets is a good man, and it's a good organization. He was in the South African Parliament and defended the white minorities' right to be in the country and to remove this unlawful law. And the ANC put forward the argument that Ernst Roets stated that there are three ways that the white men have acquired land in South Africa through the years. And one is by pure discovery, where no one lived because no one could live there during that time because of lack of technology, because it's too little water and it rained too little, so it was semi-desert. And the tribe of that time in Africa didn't have the technology to drill for water, but the Boers had. And this is vast land. This is land that is almost in the equivalent size of Sweden in geographical area, where people could not live because they couldn't drill for water. So the Boers settled there, drilled for water, and built a civilization. And the second way that they acquired land was they actually negotiated with some black tribes and bought land. Bought and paid for, in the same way as United States bought and paid for Alaska by the Russians. It's a legitimate deal, and the only way to claim that it's not is to say that one party is not grown enough to enter those kinds of deal. And then, of course, the third is what have been almost a go-to move to get land, and that's by the means of warfare, which definitely the black tribes have acquired land by other black tribes in the centuries before through the ages. But anyway, so this law student was aware. This is the big tide of idea in South Africa, that the whites stole the land from the blacks, due to this argument that just because you have a house and you don't use all the rooms, it's still your house, which was what this black parliament member told Ernst Roets when he claimed the facts that they could not habitat this land because they could not drill for water. Yeah, but it's our house. We just didn't use that room at that time. It doesn't give you a right to just take the room and move into our house. So then this white college student made the case, the law student made the case that, all right, so if that was property theft, then what's have happened thereafter is an intellectual property theft of that you take our intellectual property and have a habitat that, like, in quote, your own land, but it's with our property. So how do we deal that with a new redistribution of, like, trying to make so-called historical unjust just?
I got absolutely, this is fantastic, folks. And this is why getting together with those who want to serve white well-being, those who want to put an end to the victimization of Western kind around the world is so very important. I was just speaking because I had been inspired to speak by what Jonas was saying. Something came back to mind for him while I was speaking. And then as soon as he began talking, something came back to my mind that is I used back all the way back in high school with a high school teacher. I've used several times over the years, and I think it's going to have to go into the next iteration of Go Free. And it is this: when it comes to this, it's a little thing, but it worked so well, even in high school. I essentially unpacked what the acquisition of land, how it was done, how it was achieved with my high school teacher. And well, I'm thinking of the first time I did it because I ended up doing it several times over the years there because it worked so well. But I essentially said, okay, well, how do peoples acquire land? And it essentially was the same thing. It was like force, occupation, warfare as a category, or loosely, purchase, negotiation, trade was another category. And then the weakest category, discovery, because it's so easy to just show up later and say that, well, we discovered it first, but one of the ways. So I broke that down, and then I said, so how is the white race different from any of the other races and their acquisition of land? Not at all. No difference whatsoever. We've acquired land the exact same way every other race has acquired land. So it negates the anti-white argument.
It's actually a big difference. I don't agree.
In what way?
The difference is all those other, take for instance, New Zealand. We arrived there. They have this Maoris there. And so we obviously didn't discover that land, and we were not the native of that land. The Maoris are. And the reason why it is the Maoris are still around.
Right.
If they weren't around, we would be the native of that land, and we would be the discoverers of that land in the same way the Maoris are, because the Maoris weren't the first ones there as well. They arrived there and they killed and ate the people that were there before them.
Well,
that's a thing that is very common when other people have discovered land. They ate the native and became the native themselves. It's no witnesses left to speak of. If there's no witnesses, there's no victim. And
I see what you're saying. So they were okay. So the other groups, right? They were showing up and killing either. Well, I mean, they would obviously, it would be a genocide because they're just eating them after they've killed them all, right? That's what you're saying.
And we did not.
Right. Okay.
And that's also interesting. Like if you take the British that came to Australia, and to the British that came to New Zealand, and the Europeans to America, it's a significant difference with the Dutch that went to South Africa.
Right.
And that is that there were very, very little conflicts of war. Of course, it was wars in South Africa, but it was so little of it. And then they actually took care of the native in a complete different way, like the Australians did with the Aborigines.
Right. Yeah, completely different. I totally agree. Completely different treatment of the either conquered people or defeated people, or the negotiated or the partners in the negotiation. 100%. Yeah, I agree with that.
So demographically, it's now I don't have the number in my head straight up, but I think it was in the mid 1900s. Of course, it's not like a proper people counts, but it was almost 50-50. 50% whites in South Africa and 50% blacks, roughly speaking. Today, it's like 1% whites in South Africa. And that the reason why is during the apartheid time that actually took care of the black community to that extent, so they could just not outvote the white minority, because that wasn't really what happened. That was like literally what happened, but it wasn't because of that. It was they had bred up this black population to that extent, so they could not by pure force keep them at bay. So when they demanded one vote, the democratic system of today, it was either that or a very devastating civil war. And the Clerk government, the last white minority government, decided that we are not up for this fight. We need to give them equal rights, and they voted them out. But it was because of that pure force.
Jason, I think if I remember correctly, you had made the same point about Amerindians at one point, where everyone comments how there's a lot of similarities between them and certain Asian populations. They have a Mongoloid look to them. And then didn't you say something to the effect of, for all of these narratives about stolen land in the American context, Amerindians, all the tribes here, that you don't hear about the fact that there were people here before Jonas mentioned Alaska a few minutes ago.
Yes.
Before Asian people crossed the Bering Strait when it was a land bridge, came down through present-day Canada. And okay, so that's how North American, the Amerindian tribes, their lineage goes back to. Yes. No one mentions the fact that there were, I mean, is there evidence of this, or is this something you were speculating? Do we know were there peoples here prior to that and that they genocided them?
Well, there may or may not be evidence at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
You'll have to check with the geniuses at YouTube and these CNN and those kinds of places. But there may or may not be ample evidence of peoples in the Americas prior to the Asiatics coming across what is speculated to be the Bering Straits land bridge. And that is why we don't see, this of course is pure speculation, but that is why you don't see any American Indians in Asia. It's kind of an interesting thing that the American Indians, for some reason, every single Asian that looked like an American Indian must have come over to the Americas. It's a fascinating phenomenon.
Didn't work both ways. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And is there, Jonas? Is there evidence?
Maybe because it's lots of people in Sweden that will get a one-way ticket out of here as well. Maybe it was something like that happened in the past.
Maybe. Is there, on the same token, is there evidence of what you said, the Maori in New Zealand, evidence of cannibalism of the peoples that were there prior to the Maori?
Yeah, I speak. This is just bro science. I got a friend that lives there that told me the story that the Maoris weren't the first habitats. So the cannibalism could have been just a poetic way of telling about the brute culture of the past. But if I remember correctly, it was not uncommon that they actually literally ate people.
Yeah. I have one more question about South Africa, but it's going to bridge us back to your other documentaries, and we can talk a little more about Sweden. You mentioned in the beginning of speaking about the Boar Project how sometimes Swedish people just go down for holiday to South Africa, how there's a relation there. But towards the end of your Boar Project documentary, you actually point out, I guess it was why it was particularly powerful for you as a Swede to do this documentary, is that you illustrate there's a very clear line and connection between Sweden and South Africa, and how there were people and elements in Swedish government that propped up the ANC and brought about the changes that happened, I guess it would be in the early 90s, right? When the whole paradigm and structure changed there in South Africa, how Sweden was huge in setting up the current government, and how they think, again, it's part of this humanitarian project that they're not only, I guess, within Sweden, this is their outsourced version of it, that they're doing this humanitarian project in this other country. Tellingly, one of the gentlemen that you interview, though, at the end says, he's talking about spreading democracy and he's speaking in these ideals, but he does say, tellingly, that democracy hinges on the actual people comprising the political unit. So if you could just talk maybe for a minute or two about the connection between Sweden and South Africa and what you hit on at the end, and then we could pivot into your most recent documentary, Why is Sweden Multicultural? We'll bring it back domestic to Sweden itself.
I think I need an hour or two to actually wrap
Yeah, I know
up
it's
that
just
one.
going to be an overview. We'll have to have you back to like have specific topics.
But Sweden played a major role for the ANC movement, for the legitimacy of that movement, especially during the 60s and the 70s, due to the Cold War. The apartheid government were anti-communist, and it was lots of geopolitical games in the movement down there, where the communist states of the world, the Soviet Union and China, supported all these black so-called liberation armies against former colonial states. And Sweden, being a non-NATO country but still very socialistic, managed to play a game there that were very crucial. And so I think the Swedish socialistic government saw an ideological reason to act as they did, but I also think they lacked the practical experience that white minority had in South Africa, that Sweden during this time was very, very homogeneous. So we didn't have to deal with the problem that we were aiming to solve for other people that actually were dealing with this problem. So it's a very, very tragic story, and Sweden played a very, very crucial role in that. And we gave a lot of money to the ANC in the 60s and 70s, and not just money, we also gave them international legitimacy by inviting them over to Sweden and just have their back in the international community.
Yeah, well, interesting how as that was being pushed in this other country in South Africa, at home in Sweden, and the same era you're talking about in the 60s and 70s, the seeds were being sown in the discourse about multiculturalism in the decades following World War II. There was a lot of talk about this, and that's what you open up your most recent documentary, which just came out. So everyone congratulate Jonas on another piece. He has this is your third documentary, right?
I maybe have done like 10 documentaries, but it's all been in various budget schemes. This latest one is definitely the more high end in the budget wise, and the Boar Project were number one before this one, and some documentaries I've done just by myself with a very cheap camcorder. The most interesting one is probably when I visited the witch doctors in South Africa. They kidnap small babies and torture them, and the more pain they have when they take the organs, the more powerful the medicine will be. So I actually interviewed a family that has fled to Sweden, a South African family that had a kidnap attempt on their young daughter in this regard from witch doctors. So it's a very, very terrific story.
Wow. Oh, man. Anyway, I'm trying to...
sorry if I destroyed your bridge.
Image of that. Unfortunately, things like that might be happening here in the States, but... I apologize. I didn't know you had so many documentaries. Maybe I was aware more from your English. You put some English content on your YouTube channel. I was, of course, aware of Boar Project, Genderless Society, which we haven't spoken about yet, and Why Sweden Multicultural, which is what we're about to talk about for a moment. And again, getting back to what we were saying, relating to South Africa. So you're pushing this multicultural vision in South Africa. It's really ramping up in the 60s and 70s, and that at home, it's being fanning the flames there, and you go into the groups behind that, and then in 1975 this was voted in, and a lot of people didn't even really realize what they were voting for, as far as you were able to tell, and the people that you spoke to. But we're curious to hear really about. There's so much we could talk about at that documentary. Again, this is the first time we're having Jonas on tap, so we're just kind of giving an overview of some of his work. We'd love to have you back at some point, maybe to focus on a specific topic. There's a lot we could say about this documentary as well that just came out, but there's something you interview a gentleman a few times, but in the segment that he appears towards the end, he says something that aligns perfectly with what we speak about here, with what Jason's research and his book has been about, and he's been teaching and spreading people going free, what he mentioned before, which is that unlike in other regimes or other eras, what you're seeing now in Sweden, and again, you're seeing it unfortunately across the West, although we'd like to see that the tide is turning, is that there's not a moral pushback against this. That people don't have language and a moral frame to say, no, you're being anti-white. They're just taking it. There's just a constant justification through media, through education, through policy of it only works one way, but somehow this is justified. So I think it's important for us to talk so you're at least aware that we're working on that front. But we'd like to hear in your own words what you think of that the moral pushback and how that's needed. And then once you answer that, I'm also curious if people in Sweden are starting to see this more. I know that it's a lot of risks. People risk a lot when they speak out against this kind of thing. But are people, are they just getting sick of it? Is there a change in what's acceptable to talk about questioning multiculturalism?
Yeah, I start in the end. I must say it's a major change. And I think that I'm in a very good mood because I got involved when I was so very, very young. And I understand people that starting to wake up. Just a couple of years ago, we had this, what they labeled the big migrant crisis of 2015, 2016. And that woke really a lot of people up. And if you woke up 2016 and you go into present day with this COVID restrictions, and it's just a bad faith in society in general. Yeah, of course, you will be pretty depressed about how the development is going. But if you woke up in the 90s or early 2000, things is going. We have a very good wind in the sail. It's each year is better than the next one, and I just feel it from my own personal network how that is growing. How people greet me out in town, from not looking at me 15 years ago to everyone is pleasantly polite towards me. That doesn't necessarily mean that they agree with me, but today I would say that maybe I'm not an accepted part of the established Sweden, which I definitely don't want to be, but I'm definitely accepted in the social life in Sweden, which I weren't for 10, 15 years ago. So it's a major change. Now I lost track. Yeah, morality. Yeah, I think the morality is key. The logic argument is important for your own conviction, to be feeling that you're walking the narrow path of truth and doesn't walk with this big herd of morons that don't think by themselves but only think in this group terms. And I think that was actually the hardest part for me, because I consider myself to be quite a rational individual when I grew up, and in some sense I'm still are, but I've been very aware that I'm more driven by my emotions, and I think humans in general are, and emotions and morality tie together very well. So when you look yourself in the mirror, you want to see a good person, you want to see someone that's doing the right thing, and that's the most important it's more important than what is objectively truth or what is objectively scientific proven or not. So I think that's the focus, and that's also what I see with the shift, why things are going very well for Sweden in the nationalist movement, or Swedish friendly movement as we label it in Sweden. And that is in the 80s or 90s, when I got involved in it, then that was the primal drive that this society goes against our own group's interests. That's what we said, and we tried to put forward a logical argument to that, and it was dismissed because of reasons, emotional reason mostly. And the worse it as it has gotten this last 2 decades, more and more groups have joined the Swedish friendly movement cause. And we can see the working movement. We have a union that has been tied up with the Swedish Social Democrats since its foundation. It's a very, very strong social democratic union. Their members are in a majority voting for the Swedish Democrats. So they are actually nationalists. They don't support this working movement of the world, but they're still there ideologically. So they have this left-wing view of life. And when I got involved in the movement, they said that, no, but your views is not adaptable with our value system. But they kept their value system and they joined the Swedish friendly movement. And you see that also with some of the conservative movements. They said that our value system is in opposite to your value system, so we can't have anything to deal with you. But lots of conservatives have still joined the Swedish friendly movement and being conservative still. But I think the most prominent and more obvious part of this is the libertarians. Libertarians historically have not been very nationalistic or definitely not thinking in group terms. They have been very individualistic and been very pro open borders. And now the Swedish libertarian movement, which is not small, it's small for being in a socialistic country, but it's actually a pretty big group. And most of them actually speaks today of the importance of a homogeneous country due to the reality check of that. So all they are still libertarians. They don't call themselves necessarily nationalists. They went from one day saying that we're libertarians, group doesn't matter, the only thing that matters is individual and financial settlements, to today say that I'm still libertarian, but group matters. I need to live in a homogeneous society to have a free society. And I think that's the future way forward, that people actually need to realize that politics is the clashes of group interests, and we have very artificial group identities, such as if I consider myself to be a part of the working movement or in the conservative movement or in the libertarian movement, but that there is an identity that can't be removed from me. And that's where you come down to the fundament of what is in my group's fundamental interest. And that is family and the extension family. It's that of your people. And the more different artificial groups that realize that there is not a contradiction between the values that I have in this artificial group with the values of what I'm actually are given by nature, they are actually very compatible. Then we can get to a society that feels much better with itself. Then we will have a society where the left and the right in the Swedish parliament actually squabbles and quanders about what is best for the Swedes, what is best for us. And then I don't really care that much, at least not today, if we have this amount of tax or not. But I'm more right, a conservative libertarian than I'm left. But in the schemes of things, I don't care.
It sounds like you're saying the circumstances are such where it's forcing people to get more honest and closer to the bone about what really matters to them, and people are getting more willing to admit that, which is a good thing. I know in Sweden, I forget what your word for it is, but there's a certain value that you put on not sticking your head up too high above the, what's the word for that?
Jantelag.
Yeah, jantelag. So I was curious as to, what is going to take to get Swedish people to speak out more about this? And it sounds like you're saying that is happening.
Yeah, it's definitely happening. And I enjoy my fair share of anthropology and evolutionary psychology, and how that plays in role how group acts, or even individual how they act. And Sweden is Swedes are a consensus driven people, and if you're not part of the group, like back in the days, it's equal with a death sentence if you have a harsh winter around the corner.
Yeah.
So it's like, be part of the group. Doesn't matter what is true or not, because truth doesn't keep you alive. Your group keeps you alive. And that's a little bit of the clashes we have today, is that our group is in the wrong direction. So we need to have the whistleblowers that actually says that I know that we need to stay in the group to be alive, but if we stay into the group, we will die.
It's interesting, Jonas, because generally speaking, as you just said, there's this idea, well, not just an idea, you see it in practice, that in Sweden, in other Scandinavian countries, there's a lot about consensus. And even though that has left the door open to this multiculturalism because that became the dominant narrative, I wonder if when you reach a tipping point and enough Swedish people realize that their safety, their family, lies in the consensus of them all banding together, if you might actually be one of the first countries to throw off this yoke and really push back. It's like that element that was an Achilles heel can turn around and become your greatest strength too, in the right context.
Yeah, it's not unlikely. Some people say that Finland, Norway, and Denmark are better off than Sweden due to the demographic. But if you look at those countries, they don't really have a free media as we have in Sweden. It's my company, Polyester Media, is not we're not even close to be the biggest free media in Sweden. We're actually quite small when it comes to the free media in Sweden, and we are a small country, and still we have like 30,000 subscribers on YouTube. So we are not small, but the free media in Sweden is substantial. We have a very, very big reach, and you don't see that in any other Nordic countries. And I don't know how it is in Germany and France or Great Britain, but at least when we compare to our Nordic neighbors, and I think it's because our mainstream media and our establishment have gone so full tilt and have not been willing to compromise the truth. They have always white pixeled immigrant criminals. So you can't see that it's immigrants, even if it's it's so ridiculous. Even if the crime just occurred and the police are looking for this person and they're going out to the community to like, call us if you see this person, the paper print the picture, but they white pixel it, so you can't see the picture. You just see white pixels. You can't identify. So that's the level of Swedish media. And when you have in Denmark and Norway and Finland, they have a much more pragmatic media that is more willing to actually align themselves with some kind of objective reality which their citizen can agree upon. But you don't have that in Sweden, and that has been a major open window for a free media that is not governed by big financial interests.
I had one, I don't know if we have time for one more quick question, and then we'll see if there's any from the chat. Just to briefly, I know it's hard to do this because there's so much to it, but briefly talk about, just bridge this for 1 second to Genderless Society, the other documentary that I mentioned. You were talking a few moments ago about emotions, people's emotions. And when I was watching the interviews you did in Genderless Society, it reminded me of something we speak a lot about here. It's near and dear to my heart. Is it seems and I want your quick comments on this. It seems the way children are being taught in these schools where they're trying to be gender neutral, which was a big topic in this documentary, is that children can't negotiate boundaries. They're not being taught that there's distinctions, and they're not, therefore they don't know how to deal with their own emotions or negotiate with others, even though on the surface, the way that it's presented is that these schools are more open-minded, and, to use their word, we don't use their words, but in their words, they see words like progressive. But if a 10-year-old could just say, well, today I feel like a girl, so address me as a girl, a 10-year-old boy could say that, or something like that. They're not learning about distinctions, and that distinctions is actually the boundaries between things are what makes life meaningful and what makes life beautiful. And negotiating those distinctions is how you function as an adult in the world, how you can move through the world. But the love between a man and a woman, it looks different in different relationships, of course, and there's different personalities, but there's still generalities. A love between a man and a woman is because of the polarity between masculine and feminine. Or with what we're talking about, it's ultimately there's a time for self-defense, of course, if you're being attacked or undermined. But none of us here are doing this because we have animosity towards other people as such. I want a world where there are distinct boundaries, again, because that's what's beautiful. I can go to Japan and enjoy that it's Japanese, and then you go to London and it's an English city, God forbid. And that's what makes life meaningful, those distinctions. These genderless schools and this genderless agenda is trying to break that down. The PR around it is that it's all about love and inclusivity. But what concerns me is that it's actually metaphysically incorrect. It's biologically incorrect, but it's also metaphysically incorrect. And when a society is lying to itself, there's going to be grave, grave consequences. So I'm just curious if you can just, whatever thoughts you have around that, about how the children are being taught, but specifically about boundaries and how they're not being taught to properly negotiate with others.
No, it's full on child abuse, and it's literally scary because, and this is, I think lots of people have a problem with this kind of intellectuals, like in quote intellectual, because they are very good to portray what they are doing in words, like people that are read up on how these people talk or how they reason have a hard time to talk against. And then I think it's more important that they say, like, that they refer to themselves instead of taking a logical argument against these gender pedagogues, and say, like, I don't feel this is right for my child, like, to stay there, because they dress it up that it's about you have your inheritance of what you're capable to do, and pretty much the only thing the environment can do is to hold you down or to destroy you, because the environment can't lift you up to higher than what your inheritance allow you. Like, if to put it a little bit bluntly, we can create idiots, but we can't create geniuses through environmental effect. So they would say that they are removing the negative environment for those individuals that doesn't fit into the gender roles. For instance, that you have a young daughter that is more wired to become an engineer, maybe, like traditionally, or even biologically, if you look at the normal distribution curve. Girls, women tend to be more oriented to play with things that has some kind of human interaction within them, and boys are more interested in things and stuff and how different things works and stuff like that, and also a little bit rougher game. So they just say that, but we just want to remove those stereotypes. So if a boy wants to play a little bit more family, he will be allowed to do that, and no one will tease him for that. And if a girl wants to drill something or try to build something instead of playing with dolls, she will be allowed to do that, and no one will tease her for that. That is literally what will tell you what they are doing, but that's not what they are doing. They are messing up with this young people's head and put a pressure on them that they are not developed to deal with. I also talked to a professor with this documentary. He didn't want to be on camera, so this is off camera. But he said that he wasn't really that worried because the biological drive in human is so strong. So when these kids, and this comment is under those circumstances that it's not so abusive that it literally like destroys the kids psychologically, but they will just orient back to what they are born to be in the lower teens, or like before that even. So he was like a little bit of, doesn't matter, it's completely unnecessary, and that's a little bit distasteful, but I have trust in biology, and this won't affect them. But I'm not so certain as he is, because it's some really messed up things.
I'm concerned about it working in tandem with environmental chemicals and things in our food. And it all seems to be pointing in that direction. Again, a breakdown of meaning and making people more malleable to control. But I think we're at the point where we're just going to see if there's a couple of quick questions. I know we went a little over the hour of regular discussion to begin with, but Jason, do we have anything from the chat?
We do. And can you hear me all right? Because the software said the mic was unplugged, but it appears to be.
You sound good.
All right. Fantastic. Well, it has been a marvelous tap. Filmmakers, especially filmmakers with the skill and the intelligence as Jonas, these are treasures. And we need Jonas to continue doing what he's doing, and we need others to get on board and do this sort of thing, because it is a battle for the mind. And more importantly, as you can hear right from Jonas' mouth, the kind of direction where he's coming from in the delivery of the information and the type of information that's shared in these things is the kind of approach that is going to liberate our people, as opposed to keep us trapped in the anti-white narrative and then shackled to that story where we will never survive. We do have a couple. We had Speeder said that Jonas is based, and we have the question: what is next for Jonas in relative to films? What's your next movie? Your next documentary?
I'm working with one about the Christian faith. We have a very big problem in Sweden with a very politicized church, and the church doesn't. It's a state church, or it says that it's not a state church, but it is a state church, and it's a very political institution that is not connected with its members that actually believe in Christ. So,
well, I'm interested in hearing that. When do you think you'll be done with that?
Maybe to next summer.
Well, we'll have to have you back for sure, brother. We also have a financial gift from the one and only Mrs. Jess Horst, financially gifting $25 US. Let's get a round of raucous emojis, ladies and gentlemen, for Mrs. Jess Horst, $25 US, and she gives us 3 white emoji hearts. I guess that's one for each of us. That's perfect. A fair distribution. And we appreciate that, Jess. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Folks, we have reached the end. It's time to tap out. But before you go, we're going to find out from Jonas where you can find him and his work and contribute to the work that he is doing. Jonas, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for letting me joining the show. I really appreciate it. We are on polyestermedia.com, and Polyester Media is on YouTube and on Odysee. And for those that are interested in the South Africa project, we have a dedicated webpage for that on boarproject.com.
All right. Thank you for anyone listening in replay. If you're on YouTube or Odysee or a place like that, when you go to the afterparty.tv, the site Jason and I have for the streams, you go to this episode, all of Jonas's links will be there. You can search his name. It's Jonas. So just if you put that into the search bar, once it's up on the site, it'll come up. You can search shows by guest. You can search shows by topic. They're tagged. So that's the afterparty.tv. And my own site is greatorder.com. But we will see you all very soon. Have a good rest of the weekend, everyone.
It's been magnificent. And I want to read Hexagram said, Jason, Jared, and Jonas, your wisdom and creativity brings hope. Thank you so very much.
Thank you
for that very kind compliment. A big thank you to everybody who was here today. And whether you're live or in replay, a big thank you to Ms. Jess Horst for the financial gift, and everybody who financially gifts to keep the flag of white well-being moving ahead in every land that we have built Western civilization. Remember, folks, it's ours. We created it. We're the only people who can sustain it. We love you all, and we are looking forward to seeing you again